In this video, we will continue the discussion of our first step where we just figured out the entities that are close to modeling our requirements, and now we would want to establish the relationship between them. Which entities participate with each other and what would be the cardinalities. So before doing, you might want to just write them apart like this, and if possible, make sure that the entity you think will be participating with a lot of other entities, you put them in the center so that we can avoid crossing of too many lines. So let's start with the priest. Okay, let's start associating the relationship. Now if you see, a priest can be doing several distributions. When the system starts running, priest could have had done several distributions. So this is a typical one-to-many relationship, and each distribution can have several detail items in it, which we already discussed. So this is like a header and this is like a detail. So if you visualize that, it could look something like this, where a priest has several distributions under his name and each distribution has several details. Moving forward, we can look at the responsibility part. Now this is something which you'll have to be careful. There are several responsibilities the authorities would have given the priest. Let's say taking care of the purchase of groceries is one responsibility. Taking care of ensuring that the security is in place is another responsibility. So let's say we have several such responsibilities, and one priest is given or could be given several such responsibilities. We don't know, but we need to have a provision for that. Going forward, there are some priests who may not have any responsibilities. There are some priests who will have only one responsibilities, or there will be some priests who will have many responsibilities. It depends on the situation, like a seniority, the decisions by the authorities, and so on. Now the other way around, if you look at it, a given responsibility can be taken up by one priest or several priests. Can that really happen? Now if you think about a huge temple where taking care of the security is one of the responsibilities, it is not necessary that such a big responsibility is given to only one priest. It could be shared between two or more. So this is a classic example of many-to-many. Now you will find such kind of design several places in a database. One common example could be in a role-based access. Now you have several users of a system, and you can have several roles you can have several permissions. So if you can take it as permission. So if you can imagine this as a user, and if you can imagine this part as permission, a given user can have several permissions, and a given permissions could be applied to several users. So again, it would be a many-to-many. So we will have this as a many-to-many relationship. How this will be implemented in the database, that's something we'll go ahead and figure out in the next few steps. Now we do have a few more entities to be associated. So let's look at the prasadam type next. A given prasadam type can have several items under it. Example, if you just take a prasadam type as a rice or a rice item, so you can have lemon rice, you could have tomato rice, masala rice, so on and so forth, which could be distributed as prasadam. And similarly, you could have a sweet type, and you have something like laddu, or you can have mithai, all of which are part of this prasadam type called sweet. So this is a classical one-to-many association. Now it looks like this is all, but if you see, it's always better to see if we are, if we've covered all the associations, or we've left out something. Now if you take a look at closely, I want you to imagine this in more detail. The moment you have an entity which is tracking detail, that is where you will have some more associations waiting to be formed. Now if you think of this distribution detail, you know what it will have. Of course, it will be associated with the distribution ID, and whoever the priest is responsible, of course that will be linked with the distribution. But in the detail part, you will have which prasadam, what was the unit price for it, and what was the quantity which was distributed, total quantities. Like even if like 1000 people came in and everyone were given one laddu, so we would have one record saying 1000 laddus and whatever price was involved in it. Where to take it from, we will see all those things. Right now I am more focused on forming the type of association between them and the cardinality between these prasadam and distribution detail. So at this point you should imagine that a distribution detail can have a detail about one specific prasadam in one row. Now if the priest has gone ahead and distributed several other type of prasadams, that will be in separate rows. So if he went ahead and distributed 3 prasadam items, so let's say that was the first distribution that was ever made after this software was installed. So right away there will be 3 rows in the distribution detail table. One for a rice, one for a prasadam, one for a sweet, and one for something else. Right? Or if you just made 2 types of items, there will be 2 rows, one for the sweet, one for the rice item. The quantity for each of these is recorded separately. But if you think about the association between distribution detail and prasadam, one row of distribution detail will simply be associated with one prasadam item. Okay, so this is something which you'll have to carefully imagine. If it is difficult at this point, you might just want to put some data into the database and want to try it out. But I strongly suggest not to, because remember, we are going code first, and I would want you all to imagine everything in terms of code. But if at this point of time this relationship is not clear, you can just skip this and go ahead and start figuring out more information as to what kind of fields will be there in this detail, what kind of fields will be there in the distribution, and then things will start becoming more evident. Now, since I already have a good view of what this distribution detail will look like, I will go ahead and form the association between them, saying every small item in this distribution detail or every single row in this distribution detail will be associated with one prasadam item. And we talked about vehicle, right? Wherein this was not part of the requirement. If you just see there, this is not part of the requirement, but I wanted to bring this in to demonstrate the fact that you can still implement a one-to-one relationship, but in a different way. So I'll just go ahead and include that in this diagram. We will talk about it a little later. Remember, if you see the list of entities which we talked about, even though I had this locker here, I decided to do away with it for 2 reasons. One, I wanted to avoid this one-to-one, and second, there was nothing much in the locker apart from locker number, not many properties there. So I can go ahead and just put them in the priest itself. So you might similarly want to make a list of properties also, if it makes you any more comfortable in forming the associations between them. So before you start forming the associations, you can at least make a few properties. You can list them out, and remaining you might just leave it for later. So at this stage, our diagram looks like this. I know we haven't really spoke much about the vehicle part. We'll do it in the coming videos.